Okay, guys, I have the transcripts for June 18th, the very short day. It's literally so short, it's about 20 pages. Typically, these transcripts have been anywhere from 260 to 300 and plus pages. So this should be a fairly short. Do me a favor, support the channel, hit the like. It would really help out the channel. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let's go right now. All right, so the court says, all right, please be seated. We have a sick juror who is unable to be here today. He was on his way here and had vertigo symptoms and had to turn back and go home. And the juror's partner dutifully notified us. So we have his contact information. If we need any further information, but he's not here. And he's on the regular jury. So I don't think there's any way to proceed today. But I'll hear from the parties if they have some other ideas here. Miss Comey speaks. I suppose my only question is, Your Honor, does this sound like a sort of temporary impairment that may resolve itself, such as that we can resume on Friday, or is this a longer term issue? Court says, we'll make a call. The sense that I got, and I'll ask the deputy to correct me if I'm wrong, is that it was literally unexpected and possibly momentary issue. But we'll obviously monitor the situation to see if it's something more serious. But as far as we know now, it has just it was just a today situation. Miss Comey speaks. Okay, understood, Your Honor. In that case, I agree we can't proceed, but I also don't see a basis to remove this juror at this point. All right, the court addresses Agnifilo. Mr. Agnifilo, any different thoughts? Agnifilo speaks. Probably not, but let me just run it down for a second, Judge. Okay. Niflo speaks. Your Honor, thank you. Would the court be open and we have the explicit consent of my client to do this, to meet at the sidebar and have a sealed record so I can ask the court possibly a couple of questions? The court says, any objection from the government? Comey speaks. No objection, Your Honor. I imagine sealing would be appropriate because Mr. Agnifilo is going to be asking about medical information of a juror that should be private. Agnifilo speaks. That is correct. All right. That is fine. Let's do that. We're going to keep the real time running because my understanding, based on our prior discussions, is that we can keep the feed going so the attorneys and Mr. Comey can see what is happening at the sidebar and then seal the transcripts, and that should resolve things. But I'm saying that here to make sure that I'm not missing something and that the court reporter or anyone else can speak if I got it wrong. Comey speaks. Well, just to confirm that the same process that was used during seal sidebars is voir dire can be sealed here to make sure that the real time doesn't go out to the public. But I understand Mr. Agnifilo to be saying that even if the real time does not work, Mr. Combs is comfortable with Mr. Agnifilo asking these questions and then conveying the information back to Mr. Combs. Court speaks. Is that correct, Mr. Agnifilo? Agnifilo speaks. That is correct. But I believe the real time is now working. The court then asks, it is not working? No, Agnifilo says. No, it is. It wasn't until 10 seconds ago, but it is now working. Okay, let's have a sidebar, says the court. Now documents 67, 61, 67, 63 are sealed. Okay, so all of this was sealed. Again, not available for us to read. But let's go to the open court part for us to review what they discuss. In open court, court speaks. Thank you very much. We're going to make further inquiries to address the juror situation. In the meantime, there are two exhibits that have been flagged, that have been objected to and by the defense. Ms. Shapiro, are you prepared to address those? Shapiro speaks. Mr. Driscoll can handle it. Court says, all right, Mr. Driscoll? Driscoll speaks. Yes, Judge. Good morning. Thank you. Okay. All right. Court speaks. So as to GXH 110, the government says that D-Rock messages would be admissible under 801 D2D or E. Let's put E aside for a moment. D2D. And so why wouldn't the entire communication be admissible? Because one-stop statement as to whom there has been laid a foundation that he furnished rugs from time to time to Mr. Combs would be admissible just as necessary context to understand the requests and other inquiries that D-Rock was making. Mr. Driscoll speaks. Your Honor, there have been no foundations laid that this is actually one stop. The government is using, I presume, the contact information as a foundation to prove that it's one stop. But that would be impermissible bootstrapping under the hearsay rule. And I would just draw the court's attention to the Al Moyad cases listed. There, the court admitted an address book to prove contact information, but it is said it did so only because the government did not rely on the address book to establish that phone number listed next to the Almoyad's name was. In fact, his phone number, but here is exactly what the government is doing. So, in the absence of some foundation that the conversation is actually with One Stop, we just don't think that the foundation has been laid. It looks like the defense is arguing on exhibits, specifically to One Stop. Now, One Stop has been mentioned a couple times through this trial as it pertains to rugs and people getting rugs for him, for Mr. Combs, to Mr. Combs, that type of situation. Brendan Paul, who again has been dubbed the mule, by Rodney Jones' lawsuit, of course, he's going to testify for the prosecution. So I do wonder, this one-stop character to Brendan Paul and what that communication looked like. Was Brendan Paul getting rugs from One Stop? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. And again, I'm doing a summary so you guys understand what's being talked about. Mr. Driscoll continues arguing. The government put on case agents who have pulled phone extractions. We've heard testimony from other witnesses authenticating phone numbers. Here, they haven't put a witness on the stand to testify who this conversation is with or what phone number this is. So the court speaks. So you would need, what would you need? Mr. Driscoll, the government put on a case agents who have pulled phone extractions. We've heard testimony from other witnesses authenticating phone numbers. Here, they haven't put a witness on the stand to testify who this conversation is with or what phone numbers this is. Court speaks. Okay, it's fair to say that if the government were able to do that, then as to both of these exhibits, there would be no remaining objection. Driscoll says, correct. Ms. Steiner speaks for the government. Yes, Your Honor. I'm a bit surprised by this argument. This is a communication that was taken from D-Rock's phone. Of course, it does have the one-stop contact, but even setting that aside, the entire content of this communication pertains to rugs and D-Rock obtaining rugs on behalf of Mr. Combs through One Stop. So there's certainly, it's authentic, and there's certainly enough in the exhibits itself to corroborate what the government is representing and what other witnesses have testified to, which is that this is, in fact, a rug dealer that provided rugs to Mr. Combs. Full stop. Mr. Driscoll speaks. Your Honor, it's the link in the chains there that this individual is the rug dealer that has not been established. The court speaks. What's the citation again? Mr. Driscoll speaks. It's the United States versus Al Moyad, 545 F.3D 139. And the pin site is 176. And I also would like to point the court to the United States versus Chavez. Here, they need that step in the chain. The court then asks, why? Driscoll argues, in order to demonstrate the relevance. The court then asks, why? Driscoll says, because in the absence of proof that this actually is One Stop, there is no relevance. Court says, well, no. They're saying that if you just look at the text communication, it's clearly a rug transaction. Driscoll says, I don't think it is, Your Honor, just looking at the substance of the communication. Okay. Court then addresses Ms. Steiner. Let me ask Ms. Steiner, who are these documents going to be used with? Ms. Steiner speaks. Your Honor, we don't expect to use it with any particular witness. Driscoll speaks. And this is the issue. The government could use exhibits in this fashion anytime they want to just bootstrap in part of their case. But we haven't heard any foundation that this is one stop. Steiner speaks, Your Honor, even setting aside just to respond to Mr. Discroll, even setting aside whether or not that this is, in fact, one stop, which again, the contact indicates that it is. There have been plenty of testimony about him. There have been much testimony that's on the record about how Mr. Combs' inner circle, which includes D-Rock as well as his personal assistants, would obtain rugs for him. That was part of their duties and responsibilities. It's very clear that D-Rock is doing that here. He says on a number of occasions in this chat that he's acting on behalf of Big Brother or P, clearly indicating the defendant. With respects to the substance of the communication, I don't think it could be any more plain that these communications are about rugs. I mean, the second chat is talking about 3 bottles, 4 bottles for $5K, 5 bottles for $10K. It's explicitly about rugs, the court speaks, right? But you're not going to have any witness explain that or lay any kind of foundation for what happened here. If you had someone who was going to testify that he corresponded with One Stop and he understood the number here to be the one stop that furnished the rugs to Mr. Combs, then I think you'd be fine at the point for purposes of this communication. But I've just read this, and you're right that it referenced some kind of transaction, but the text communication itself does not reference any kind of rugs, at least GXH110. We can separately address the other communication. This does not seem to, in any part of this, address rugs. So the way in which the government is establishing that this communication is about rug transaction would have to be because one of the contacts here identified is One Stop with his phone number. And if that's the case, then I think Mr. Discroll is saying that that's the thing that in Al Moyad case, the Second Circuit noted was not being done by the prosecution there. Not to say that that's that dispositive, because the Second Circuit didn't say much more than what's in that sentence. Steiner speaks, of course, Your Honor. I believe we have another exhibit which may be able to help establish the proper foundation. So if we can just be permitted to do that, and we could provide it to the court. The court speaks. All right. Now, do we need to look at the other exhibits, Mr. Discroll, or do you have the same objection there? Mr. Discroll speaks. Correct. All right. So why don't we see what the government has as an additional foundation to establish a necessary linkage without relying on the phone number and name that is identified in the text messages. And we'll proceed on that basis. Discroll. Mr. Discroll speaks. Sounds good, Your Honor. Thank you. Now they get into this thing about the rugs and the government, of course, not laying the foundation. We just read that. And this is important because it's, part of the RICO, of course, right? Just so people are aware. And the next part that they get into a bit of an argument about a footnote in the charges as it pertains to the S trafficking, okay? But then they go back to One Stop in those messages. So, because it made me wonder whether these charges are going to stick as it pertains to the rugs. If all we have a One Stop, messages back and forth, and the prosecution hasn't laid the foundation, it does kind of make you wonder, well, what is this all about? They go back to it. Driscoll goes back to this. Now, let me just say, shout out to my wonderful attorneys, my moderator specifically, who told me in the chat that, when it comes to cases like this, you have attorneys kind of working all around the clock, not just, arguing back and forth, but like actually doing the research to make the objections to some of the exhibits. So I thought that was interesting. And I think that Scott Driscoll, who's kind of been in the back, he's actually doing a lot of the research for these objections that are coming through. So let's get into what else was said about One Stop. Let's go. Ms. Lovick goes back to arguing for the government. Your Honor, could I just bring your attention to one more aspect of this chat between D-Rock and One Stop? Court says yes. Ms. Slavic speaks. The phone number assigned to the contact One Stop that we see in the communication at government exhibits H110 is a number that ends in 7333. The government will seek to admit a separate exhibit, which is at government's exhibit A432. That's a chat from one of the defendant's phone numbers and the chat that is between the defendant and One Stop using the same number. Both chats on their face relate to Rug's transaction, which is not surprising because as at least 4, maybe 5 witnesses have testified, One Stop was a rug dealer that the defendant obtained rugs regularly from. So, between the witnesses and testimony, the content of the chat, and the overlapping contact information, I think the government has well established by a preponderance that these chats are admissible. I'm happy to pull up both exhibits if that would be helpful to Your Honor. Court says, I am looking at 432 right now. Slavic speaks. A432? Court says yes. Here, I take it that you're saying this communication has verbiage that can only be understood as reflecting a rug transaction. The references to FBV, etc. Slavic speaks. Exactly, Your Honor. Court says, all right, Mr. Driscoll, if that was the objection, then I think what the government is saying is that if A432 has content that actually demonstrates that's what is being discussed in a rug transaction with the numbers identified here, ending in 7333, identified as One Stop, on the basis of H110 would also be admissible on the same ground without implicating the issue that arose in Almoyad. Driscoll speaks, Your Honor. I still don't think this chat on its face can clearly be said to relate to rugs. Court says, well, I take it that the government can elicit testimony to explain, like, what those abbreviations mean. Is there someone that can do that? Government speaks. Yes, certain on their face relate to rugs. For instance, within the chat between D-Rock and One Stop, there are references to vows and relaxers. I think that pretty obvious that what that relates to. Court says, what's FB? Slavic says, football, Your Honor. I believe that Casaventura testified to the meaning of PK, which is painkiller. The court says, painkiller? All right. FB is what? Football? Slavic says, yes. That relates to the shape of the pill, Your Honor. Ms. Ventura also testified that Percocets are yellow in color, which explains a reference to yellows. And the court says, all right, I'll consider those arguments. And Ms. Steiner, you had indicated that there are some other documents you were going to seek to admit. Is this that document or is there something else? Slavic speaks. I'm sorry. Before Ms. Steiner jumps in, I just want to point out with respects to the defendant's chat with One Stop, the defendant identification of One Stop as this contact comes in as a defendant's statement. That is not hearsay. I think that comes in, and I think that can apply to D-Rock chat as well, Your Honor. Court speaks. Well, I don't think that addresses the issue that Mr. Driscoll raised. I mean, even if you just looked at D-Rock communication, I think Mr. Driscoll is basically conceding that D-Rock statements would come in either in 801 D, 2, or E. He's just saying that there's nothing to show that this was a rug transaction other than the fact that there's the name One Stop. That was what he said. And your suggestion that's not the only basis. Slavic speaks. Exactly. The court says additional basis other than the names of One Stop. Ms. Slavic says, right. I was addressing more the contact information. I think Mr. Driscoll made the argument that we couldn't be sure that this is One Stop. And I think the defendant's statement that this is One Stop rebuts that argument that Mr. Driscoll made. Court speaks. All right, very good. Well, I will consider that. I will take a look at these two documents. With that, Ms. Steiner, is there anything else? Is this the other documents you're referring to? It was, Your Honor. And I'll just note, though, that A432 is an excerpt from a longer chat exchange, which does have additional references to rugs, such as yellow footballs. If Your Honor wishes to see the full chat exchange, the government is happy to provide that to Your Honor. Court speaks. All right, why don't you send that to the court? And just for planning purposes, based on these submissions that have been made, I would overrule the objection to both of these exhibits. But I'll take a closer look at Mr. Driscoll at the two cases. I already looked at Almoyad, but you reference another case, and I'll look at that. And I'll take a look at the additional communication that Ms. Steiner submits, and I'll give you a final definitive ruling before we start. All right. Anything further? Steiner says, no, Your Honor. And the court, anything the court speaks, anything to further defense? Could I just have a minute to confer, Your Honor? Yes. Agnifilo speaking with this team. We have nothing, Your Honor. Thank you, Judge. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. We are adjourned and see you guys here 8:30 on Friday. Okay, clearly there's some decisions about, messages between D-Rock and One Stop that are going to be looked into. Now, again, I think why this is important is because then we have Brendan Paul coming through tomorrow, Friday, which we will be live. So make sure you guys check your notifications and you're ready with us because we have been waiting for Brandon since Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Today's a holiday. And then, we've been waiting, right? We've been waiting. So I know that a lot of us are kind of anticipating, well, what does Brendan Paul have to say about all of this? Let me know what you guys think in the comments about this whole situation. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye, guys.